The Nashville Money Wars, when Roy Clark's empire crumbled. October 1982. The repo men arrived at Roy Clark's Celebrity Club in Branson, Missouri, just as the evening dinner crowd was settling in for another night of down-home entertainment. The smiling host, who had charmed millions of television viewers, was nowhere to be seen as court officers began cataloging assets and posting foreclosure notices. By morning, the local papers would be full of stories about unpaid debts, broken partnerships, and the spectacular financial collapse of one of country music's most beloved figures. But the club in Branson was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind Roy Clark's wholesome TV persona and his reputation as country music's most reliable entertainer lay a web of questionable business deals, bitter legal battles, and financial partnerships that had gone catastrophically wrong. The man who had built his career on trust and likability had discovered that success in show business didn't translate to success in the cutthroat world of investments and real estate deals. This is the story of how America's favorite country entertainer became embroiled in Nashville's money wars, where handshake deals turned into courtroom battles, where friendships were destroyed over percentage points, and where the clean-cut image that had made Clark a household name became a liability in negotiations with people who played by very different rules. Roy Clark's business ambitions began modestly enough in the early 1970s, when hee-haw's success had made him wealthy beyond anything he had imagined growing up in rural Virginia. Like many entertainers of his generation, Clark initially invested conservatively, buying real estate in Nashville, putting money into established businesses, and building a financial foundation that would provide security for his family. But success breeds ambition, and Clark's personality included a competitive streak that extended far beyond music. He began to see business opportunities everywhere: nightclubs that could showcase country talent, restaurants that could capitalize on his name recognition, real estate developments that could benefit from his celebrity endorsement. The transition from conservative investor to aggressive entrepreneur began around 1974, when Clark partnered with several Nashville businessmen to open a chain of music venues across the South. The concept seemed foolproof. Clark's name would draw customers, his connections in the music industry would provide top-quality entertainment, and his television exposure would generate publicity that money couldn't buy. The first few ventures were modest successes, which only encouraged Clark to think bigger. He began investing in more speculative projects: a casino development in Nevada, a recording studio complex in Nashville, a chain of country-themed restaurants that would stretch from Texas to the Carolinas. But Clark's business education had come from show business, where success often depended on personality, charm, and the ability to build relationships based on trust and mutual respect. The world of high-stakes business investment operated by different rules, and Clark was about to learn some expensive lessons about the difference between fame and business acumen. Roy Clark's most disastrous business venture began in 1976, when he was approached by a group of Nevada investors who claimed to have inside access to casino licensing opportunities in Las Vegas. The pitch was seductive. Clark's wholesome image and national name recognition would be perfect for a new kind of casino that would appeal to middle American tourists rather than the traditional high-roller crowd. The investors, led by a smooth-talking promoter named Vincent "Vinny" Marcello, painted a picture of enormous profits from a venture that combined gambling with country music entertainment. Clark would be the public face of the operation, using his television connections to bring in headline performers and his personal reputation to attract customers who might otherwise be intimidated by Las Vegas's flashier establishments. Clark invested heavily in the project, not just financially, but personally. He spent months in Nevada meetings with investors, architects, and entertainment directors. He used his industry connections to line up performers and began incorporating references to the casino project into his television appearances and interviews. But the project was built on quicksand from the beginning. Marcello's claims about having inside access to casino licenses were largely fabricated. The financial projections were wildly optimistic and based on assumptions about tourist behavior that had no basis in reality. Most problematically, several of the other investors had connections to organized crime figures that Clark was either unaware of or chose to ignore. When Nevada gaming authorities began investigating the license application, they discovered a web of questionable financial arrangements and suspect partnerships that made approval impossible. The investigation also revealed that Clark's wholesome television image, rather than being an asset, was actually a liability in the eyes of gaming regulators who were concerned about protecting Nevada's reputation. The casino project collapsed in 1978, taking with it more than $800,000 of Clark's money and leaving him embroiled in a series of lawsuits with his former partners. Marcello disappeared, leaving behind a trail of unpaid debts and angry investors. Clark found himself facing legal claims from contractors, suppliers, and other investors who held him responsible for the project's failure. While the Vegas casino disaster was unfolding, Clark had simultaneously invested in what seemed like a much safer project, a state-of-the-art recording studio complex in Nashville that would cater to the growing country music industry. The studio project was a partnership with several prominent Nashville music industry figures, including producer Billy Sherrill and booking agent Jim Halsey. The concept was to create a facility that would rival the established studios on Music Row, while offering more competitive rates and better working conditions for artists and producers. Clark contributed both money and celebrity endorsement to the project, appearing at groundbreaking ceremonies and using his industry connections to generate advance bookings from major record labels. The studio was designed to bear his name and feature his personal involvement in its operations, but the partnership quickly became complicated by disputes over creative control and financial management. Clark, whose experience was primarily in performing rather than in the technical aspects of music production, often clashed with his partners over equipment purchases and studio design decisions. More seriously, the financial projections for the studio were based on optimistic assumptions about Nashville's recording industry that proved to be incorrect. The late 1970s marked the beginning of a recession that hit the music industry particularly hard, and the demand for studio time was much lower than the partners had anticipated. As the studio struggled financially, the partnerships began to fracture. Sherrill accused Clark of interfering in production decisions without understanding the technical requirements. Halsey complained that Clark's television schedule prevented him from being adequately involved in the studio's day-to-day operations. Clark, meanwhile, felt that his partners were using his name and money while excluding him from important business decisions. The disputes escalated into a full-scale legal war in 1979, with each partner suing the others for breach of contract and mismanagement. The litigation continued for more than 3 years, consuming enormous amounts of money in legal fees while the studio itself continued to lose money. Perhaps Roy Clark's most public business failure was his investment in Branson, Missouri, entertainment ventures in the early 1980s. Branson was just beginning to emerge as a country music tourism destination, and Clark saw an opportunity to establish himself as one of the area's premier entertainment figures. Clark's Branson strategy involved multiple ventures: a dinner theater that would feature his performances and guest stars from Hee Haw, a country music-themed restaurant, and a souvenir shop that would capitalize on his name recognition with tourists. The dinner theater seemed like a natural fit for Clark's talents and reputation. He would perform regularly, bringing in guest stars and providing the kind of wholesome family entertainment that Branson tourists were seeking. The restaurant would serve country-style food in an atmosphere decorated with Clark's memorabilia and gold records. But Clark's Branson ventures were undercapitalized from the beginning, and he had underestimated both the seasonal nature of the tourist business and the costs of operating entertainment venues. The dinner theater required expensive sound and lighting equipment, union musicians, and a constant stream of guest performers who commanded significant fees. More problematically, Clark's television and touring schedule made it difficult for him to be present in Branson consistently enough to make the ventures successful. Tourists came expecting to see Roy Clark himself, but he was often absent due to his other professional commitments. The financial pressures led Clark to seek additional investors, and this is where the deals became questionable. Several of the people who provided funding for the Branson ventures were involved in other businesses that operated in legal gray areas: payday lending operations, used car dealerships with questionable sales practices, and real estate investment schemes. These associations would later cause problems for Clark when some of his business partners became the subject of state and federal investigations. While Clark himself was never accused of any illegal activities, his reputation was damaged by his connections to people whose business practices were questionable at best. Roy Clark's most bitter business dispute involved his partnership with entrepreneur Mark Davidson in a chain of country music nightclubs that were supposed to revolutionize entertainment in small southern cities. Davidson approached Clark in 1980 with a business plan that seemed to perfectly match the entertainer's strengths and interests. The clubs would feature live country music, reasonable drink prices, and family-friendly atmospheres that would appeal to the same audiences that loved Hee Haw. Clark would contribute his name, his promotional abilities, and his connections to country music performers. Davidson would provide the business expertise, operational management, and most of the initial capital investment. The profits would be split equally between the partners. The first few clubs were successful enough to encourage rapid expansion. Within 2 years, there were Roy Clark-branded nightclubs in 8 different cities across Tennessee, Kentucky, and Alabama. Clark regularly appeared at grand openings and promotional events, drawing large crowds and generating substantial media attention. But the partnership was troubled from the beginning by fundamental disagreements about business philosophy and operational standards. Clark wanted the clubs to maintain high standards for both entertainment and customer service, believing that his reputation depended on the quality of the customer experience. Davidson, meanwhile, was focused primarily on maximizing profits through cost-cutting measures that Clark felt compromised the quality of the clubs. Davidson hired cheaper bands, reduced staff levels, and cut corners on maintenance and decoration in ways that Clark believed were damaging to his brand. The disputes escalated when Clark discovered that Davidson had been using the club's revenues to fund other business ventures without Clark's knowledge or consent. Davidson had also been negotiating entertainment contracts and making operational decisions without consulting Clark, despite their partnership agreement requiring mutual approval for major decisions. When Clark demanded a full accounting of the club's finances, Davidson refused to provide complete information and accused Clark of being an unrealistic perfectionist who didn't understand business realities. Clark responded by attempting to terminate the partnership and remove his name from the clubs. The resulting legal battle was vicious and highly publicized, with both sides airing detailed accusations about each other's business practices and personal character. Davidson portrayed Clark as a naive entertainer who expected to profit from business ventures without being willing to make the tough decisions necessary for success. Clark's lawyers painted Davidson as a con artist who had used Clark's name and reputation to build a business empire while systematically cheating his partner out of his rightful share of the profits. Perhaps the most damaging aspect of Roy Clark's business troubles involved allegations that some of his financial partners were connected to illegal lending operations. While Clark was never accused of any wrongdoing himself, his association with people who were later investigated for loan sharking and other illegal financial activities created serious problems for his reputation and his business relationships. The allegations centered around Clark's relationship with Atlanta businessman Tony Ricci, who had provided financing for several of Clark's ventures in the early 1980s. Ricci operated a network of businesses that included legitimate real estate investments and entertainment ventures, but federal investigators later determined that he was also involved in high-interest lending operations that violated state usury laws. Clark's association with Ricci came about through their mutual involvement in Nashville's entertainment industry. Ricci was a music fan who enjoyed associating with country music celebrities, and he had the financial resources to invest in entertainment ventures that appealed to him personally. When Clark needed additional capital for his Branson and nightclub ventures, Ricci was willing to provide loans at rates that seemed reasonable compared to traditional bank financing. The loans were structured as business partnerships rather than conventional debt arrangements, which helped Clark avoid some of the restrictions that banks typically placed on entertainment industry investments. But federal investigators who were examining Ricci's financial activities discovered that his loans to Clark and other entertainment figures were being funded through profits from illegal lending operations. While the loans to Clark were apparently legitimate business arrangements, they were tainted by their connection to Ricci's other activities. When the Ricci investigation became public in 1983, Clark found himself in the uncomfortable position of being questioned by federal agents about his business relationships. While he was never accused of knowing about Ricci's illegal activities, the association damaged his reputation and made other potential business partners wary of working with him. Roy Clark's business troubles were compounded by tax problems that resulted from the complex financial structures of his various ventures. Many of his business partnerships involved creative accounting arrangements that were designed to provide tax advantages, but that later attracted the attention of Internal Revenue Service auditors. The problems began when IRS auditors examined Clark's tax returns for 1981 and discovered discrepancies between his reported income and the financial records of his various business ventures. Some of the partnerships had been structured in ways that allowed Clark to claim business losses that reduced his overall tax liability, but the IRS determined that several of these arrangements were illegitimate. The tax audit revealed that Clark had been poorly advised by accountants who were more familiar with traditional business arrangements than with the complex financial structures common in the entertainment industry. Several of his business deductions were disallowed, and he was assessed significant penalties and interest charges. More problematically, the IRS investigation led to closer scrutiny of Clark's business partners and their financial activities. This scrutiny revealed some of the questionable associations and business practices that had characterized several of Clark's ventures. The IRS problems continued for more than 5 years, during which Clark was required to provide extensive documentation about his business activities and financial relationships. The investigation was eventually resolved with a substantial settlement that required Clark to pay additional taxes, penalties, and interest, totaling more than $200,000. The cumulative effect of Roy Clark's business troubles was devastating to his reputation within both the entertainment industry and the broader business community. The man who had built his career on trustworthiness and reliability was now associated with failed ventures, questionable partners, and financial disputes. Nashville's music industry community, which had always been relatively small and close-knit, began to view Clark with suspicion. Other entertainers became wary of entering into business relationships with him, and industry executives questioned his judgment about financial matters. The problems also affected Clark's television career. While Hee-Haw continued to be successful, producers and advertisers became concerned about potential negative publicity from Clark's ongoing legal disputes. There were discussions about reducing Clark's role on the show or finding ways to distance the program from his business problems. Clark's booking agent reported that some venues became reluctant to hire him for performances, not because of any problems with his entertainment value, but because of concerns about potential legal complications or negative publicity. The reputation damage was particularly painful for Clark because it contradicted everything he had tried to represent throughout his career. He had built his success on being seen as honest, reliable, and trustworthy, and the business troubles threatened to destroy that carefully constructed image. Throughout the mid-1980s, Roy Clark made several attempts to rebuild his business reputation and recover from his financial losses. He hired new advisors, restructured his remaining business interests, and tried to distance himself from the partners and ventures that had caused problems. One strategy involved focusing on smaller, more manageable business ventures that would be less likely to generate controversy or legal problems. Clark invested in a music publishing company, a small recording studio, and a few carefully selected real estate projects. He also attempted to rebuild his relationships within Nashville's music industry by being more selective about his business associations and by being more transparent about his financial activities. Clark began working with established, reputable business advisors and avoided the kind of creative financial arrangements that had caused problems in the past. But the recovery process was slow and difficult. The legal costs from his various disputes had consumed much of his available capital, and his damaged reputation made it difficult to attract new investors or business partners. Clark also discovered that the entertainment industry had changed significantly during the years when he had been focused on his business troubles. New performers had emerged, musical tastes had evolved, and the business structures that had supported his career were being transformed by changes in the recording and broadcasting industries. Roy Clark's business troubles had lasting effects on both his career and his personal life. While he continued to perform and make television appearances, he never again achieved the level of financial success that had characterized the peak years of his career. The experience also changed Clark's approach to business and financial matters. He became much more conservative in his investments and much more selective about his business partners. The man who had once been willing to invest in almost any venture that seemed promising became extremely cautious about risking his money in business deals. Clark's family relationships were also affected by the financial troubles. The stress of the legal disputes and the loss of money created tensions that took years to resolve. His wife and children had to adjust to a much more modest lifestyle than they had enjoyed during the height of his success. Perhaps most significantly, the business troubles taught Clark that fame and business success were very different things. His celebrity status had actually been a disadvantage in many of his business ventures, making him a target for unscrupulous partners and creating unrealistic expectations about his business abilities. When Roy Clark's business empire finally collapsed completely in the late 1980s, the financial damage was enormous. Estimates suggested that he had lost more than $2 million in failed ventures, legal fees and tax penalties, an amount that represented most of the wealth he had accumulated during his television career. But the personal cost may have been even higher. The business troubles had consumed years of Clark's life and energy, distracting him from his music and entertainment career during years when he should have been at his creative peak. The relationships that were destroyed by the business disputes, partnerships that had begun as friendships, professional associations that had been based on mutual respect, represented losses that couldn't be measured in dollars. Clark's reputation as a businessman never recovered, and he spent the remaining years of his career focused primarily on performing rather than on building business ventures. Roy Clark's experience in Nashville's money wars serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers that await entertainers who venture into complex business arrangements without adequate preparation or advice.
The story illustrates how quickly business relationships can turn toxic when money and ego become involved, and how difficult it can be for public figures to extricate themselves from problematic associations once they become established. Clarke's troubles also demonstrate the importance of understanding the difference between entertainment success and business acumen. His skills as a performer and television personality didn't translate effectively to the world of business investment and partnership management. For contemporary entertainers, Clarke's story offers important lessons about the need for careful due diligence when selecting business partners, and the importance of maintaining clear boundaries between entertainment careers and business ventures. The Nashville money wars that destroyed Roy Clarke's business empire serve as a reminder that success in one field doesn't guarantee success in another, and that the qualities that make someone a beloved entertainer, trust, optimism, and the willingness to take creative risks, can be serious liabilities in the cutthroat world of business investment.